Good afternoon. I'm Margaret Bim, and today is January 14th, 2021, and I am so honored to be conducting an interview of Jeannie Nelson as part of the history project of the Nashville Bar Association. Hi, Jeannie.
Hi, Margaret.
And you know, we're doing this by Zoom, and we are in the midst of a pandemic. And as I understand it, Jeannie, you are the first Zoom interview. So it's one of your many firsts. And you and I have gotten to be kind of a master at Zoom. We didn't know what it was this time last year, but we'll see how it goes. So welcome. Thank you for doing this. So we're going to start off by you telling me your full name and your birth date, where you were born, and where you grew up.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, NBA. My full name is Jean Clinton Nelson, and I have completely converted it to Jeannie since in recent years. But I was born in Nashville, Tennessee, and I have lived here the vast majority of my life, other than a couple of stints out of town.
Tell me about your mother, your father, and your brother.
I would love to. My mother grew up in Portland, Oregon, and my father grew up in Nashville. And my mother went into World War II as a nurse and met my father, who was in the military, and they met in California at I think the base or officers club or something in Monterey, California, and then happened to end up in the same part of the Pacific, over in the Guam kind of area. And my father would hitch rides on planes going to where my mother just happened to be for nursing services. And then they came back to the United States, and my grandparents about a year later got on a train and went out to Portland, and they got married. And then they moved back to Nashville, or moved to Nashville. And my mother had to enter into a large, long-time Nashville family. My father was in, and many of his ancestors have been in the business world, primarily in some branch of banking. And I have a brother who is 3 years younger than I am, named Charlie Nelson, and he is also in the financial world in Nashville. And he's something else, and has always kept me on my toes and in good humor when I would get too serious.
Well, Jeannie, tell us about growing up in Nashville then, and where'd you go to school, and start out with elementary school all the way to high school.
Okay, well, let's see. I went to Parmer School, Nashville Public School, Parmer School, from the 1st through the 6th grade. And then in the 7th and 8th grade, I went to Innsworth. And then for high school, I went to Harpeth Hall. And then for college, I went to Vanderbilt. And for law school, I went to Vanderbilt. I think homegrown is a word that a lot of people apply, or now, with as many great people who have moved to Nashville, we call ourselves endangered species, but I have spent some time outside of Nashville.
Any kind of experience working or community experience before you graduated from high school that you could share with us?
The community service that I did primarily was based on, I mean, obviously I did lots of community things with my parents in terms of food issues, and related to, my dad was an avid Rotarian here, and all of their good deeds, and my mother was involved in a variety of community things. But personally, most of mine was related to swimming, and I did a significant amount of teaching of young kids of all all ages over those times, and many of whom had never swum before. And so that's really how I spent a huge amount of my time.
You were quite a leader and recognized at Harpeth Hall, which is an all girls school. Talk about Harpeth Hall and its impact on you, and also what leadership roles you had there.
Okay. Um, well, I wouldn't trade anything for having had an all girls experience at an early age in my life. And that really seventh grade through high school was all girls. I- it Harpeth Hall, the teachers were just unbelievable teachers and unbelievable setting of standards in terms of, that people call me the grammar Nazi in many situations where I am, because they were so strict about that, and so many years of taking Latin. But that girls' school gave me a lot of chance to practice leadership, and those were things that I grabbed where I could, and those were really foundational building things. Plus, those women professors, and I don't think there were any men there at the time teaching, had a great way of picking out an attribute that you had, and just all they had to do is kind of drop it into the universe, and suddenly you thought, I can do that. And then, of course, the friendships that come from an all-girls school. I am a big believer that they are lasting in an amazing way. And through COVID, my whole class at the graduating class at Harpeth Hall does a Zoom about once a week, and it's fascinating to see how they've taken the opportunities that they got at Harpeth Hall and otherwise. I spent a fair amount of time around the boys' school and cheerleading, and kind of experiencing the differences of expectations for the majority of the girls. And there's nothing like cheerleading that sort of defines the way people are looking at what women can do. And I think, as I've told you, I had the pronounced privilege of being the tobacco bowl queen during that period. So it always brings a lot of laughs now that tobacco has gone its way. But many of my best friends were the boys at MBA who were really serious about, and the most serious about, their futures, and they accepted me, and I'm actually an honorary member of their senior class. So, it wasn't that I was just cordoned off with all girls, but the experiences, student council, and I was captain of the school split into two, and the captain of those teams, and then did really well scholastically. And I don't know, once they vote you most likely to succeed, you can't let your class down. So
Well, you haven't, that's for sure. And I think you also was recognized with the highest honor of all, Lady of the Hall, when you graduated. Is that right?
no, I was not Lady of the Hall.
Oh, well, you are for me.
No, I was the senior class representative. So, but
that's wonderful. And
but I did recently receive the outstanding alum award of achievement, and that meant a lot. I got to speak to the seniors and speak to the parents, and be able to go deep into what has things that have meant a lot to me since then, but the roots that they set. So,
Well, and this video today is going to talk about why you got that award and all the many things that you've accomplished through the years with such a great start at Harpeth Hall. What made you decide to go to Vanderbilt for undergrad?
well, I can come up with a very literate way to describe it, but the truth was that I was very focused on every single day, and I really didn't focus so much on where I was going to go to college. And a lot of my friends, that was all they thought about, and so um, I I really I just I mean, there was a really dumb reason, as we all have sort of these immature decision-making processes at that time. And because my record was such as it was, the school could see that I would be, give them some other extra bonus points if I went to some of these schools. But I actually rebelled against that in a weird kind of way, um, and decided to go to Vanderbilt. Now, psychologically, somebody would say, well, you're so secure there is and insecure to try other things, but that may be true.
What what about Vanderbilt shaped you for your career as a lawyer?
Well, that's an interesting question. I eh, somehow after I left high school, um, I remember my parents saying, just have a good time. You don't have to be so serious. You don't have to whatever. So I took that literally, and I had a really good time. But um, that was a period when I was in college from 1965 to 69. And I don't have to tell anyone who's watching a history video, there was so much going on in the world. And the chance for the exposure to that, even though I hadn't really, my activist side had not really found its pathway at that point, just experiencing, the period when, of course, we all know in 1968 how many things had and how many things happened, and happened in Nashville um, with the with the tanks over at Centennial Park, where people were worried about the violence that was going to be and could well have happened in Nashville and around the country. So I'd had the chance for some great exposure, and fortunately, my desires to have a good time, um, I did have uh, some great experiences with really smart and thoughtful people in my class, and there many of them are friends now. I just finished um, being one of the chairs of my undergraduate school 50th reunion, and to be back with these people and what they have done, and to be back with the experience of getting to know the handful of African American students who were in my class at Vanderbilt. So, um, but I think that there's no question it readied me. I think all through my life, starting way back, I I just wanted to make a big difference in life. I wanted to do something, and over the years, it became clear that I was going to need some kind of professional degree backing me up in order to have a chance to have doors opened for the kinds of things I wanted to do. So Vanderbilt, let's go back to Vanderbilt undergraduate school. I've gotten a little off. It exposed me. It set some of the best friendships of my life, and it was such a period of growth. I mean, I was by no means the rebel on the campus, but I dated them and I went around with them, and I was just so curious about what the world was going to be. And one professor, actually, when I went to see my counselor, or advisor, I guess they called them, and I said, "Good God, what am I going to do with my life?" You know, and he said, "Hey," he was my English teacher. He said, "Why don't you be a lawyer?" And so that stuck. But again, it's those words that people drop on you that you start to look around and things start to resonate.
Really glad your professor did that, because what society was telling you was to be a teacher, nurse, or secretary. And your professor saw something in you that was outside societal norms, which I know you appreciated. I know you first met Justice Connie Clark at Vanderbilt. How did that happen?
Well, we were in the same sorority, you know. Talk about a topic of to reflect on at this 50 years later and sororities, but that she was younger than I was, and made a lot better grades than I did, and so she didn't take that "go have the best time of your life," but that, of course, has turned into a lifelong friendship, and
And it's Kappa Alpha Theta, right? That was
that's
your
right.
sorority.
Yeah.
So I know you had a very significant summer experience. So I really would like for you to talk about that in London.
So just as I was graduating from undergraduate school, um, you know, again, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, but a friend of mine and I, and then someone else joined up with us. We just thought, you know, let's get out of here. So we started. We thought, well, what would be a fun thing to do? What would be an interesting thing to do? And so we thought, well, let's figure out a way to go to London. Well, working in London, work permits were almost impossible. So I talked to one of my classmates' fathers, who was, he handled uh, uh, all the insurance for, he was from Atlanta, handled all the insurance for um, Eastern Airlines, no longer with us, and Delta Airlines. And he said, "I think I've got an idea." And he went to the head of, this was a major brokerage firm with Lloyd's of London that he placed his insurance with, and he went to the head of Lloyd's and he said, "You know, trust me, and I can. I've got an idea." And the head of Lloyd's and uh, did not, well, let's just say he sent that question down to the rest of the organization, and they said, "No way, we cannot have college educated women here. Most of our employees have not gone to college," and they had all kinds of stereotypes about us. And, you know, I mean, we've all faced different stereotypes at different times, um, but this was, you know, a blow that somebody would think that we would not have a social sense of everybody's not exactly like us. But anyway, eventually the head of Lloyd's said, "Do it." And the head of this brokerage firm, I guess they had both talked together. And And so this friend of mine and I went over there, and we were paid $37 a week. And we lived with 5 people, and we put coins in the heater, the few coins that we had left, and to heat the water for the bath. But we had the adventure of a lifetime, and um, that that became what's called the Waddles Fellowship at Vanderbilt. And for the last 50 years, um, 2 to 3 um, women from Vanderbilt have gone over to work. And I mean, I was basically, serving tea when I was there. I mean, I had some, it- I also got to try to read people's writings on, I won't go through all how Lloyd's of London works, but, we were ensuring things like Johnny Unitas's arm, and you really have to be have been around back then to know who he was, but Nureyev and Fontaine's legs, and so it had some exciting, but most of it it was really making sure that um, that people knew we were people of breadth, and they adopted us, and we had an incredible time. However, probably the most important lasting thing was that we became humans to them, and that this program could go on. And now it's one of the most sought after things to do as you graduate from Vanderbilt. So they have a huge number of people apply. It is so carefully done. And I just this past year went back to London for the 50th anniversary of this program. And it I got to give the keynote speech and to talk about so many things. And another time I'll tell you the funny things that occurred, but it was the best capstone to my college education. I had no idea. London is the greatest city in the world, I would argue, and we took complete advantage of everything there, which has opened a lot of windows for me into subjects and philosophies and discrimination, because I saw the people of color who were there, and there were a great many in London because it's such a destination for people from other countries that related to England. And so anyway, I can't say enough about it, and how proud I am that it's there for other young women who want to launch out of life with a new vision.
Of course, you led the way, because if you hadn't been able to figure out how to work in the environment the way you did and be accepted, but be capable at the same time, it wouldn't have lasted the next year, much less 50. So that is a great legacy. So how did you get to law school? Okay, we have a seed planted by the professor, but that's only a seed.
Yeah.
How did you get to law school, and where did you go to law school?
Well, deep in also embedded in my person was that my father had started at Vanderbilt Law School before World War II, and then he went, to the Pacific and was in the war. And when he came back, of course, he wanted to get married, and then after they got married, a year later, they have this little baby, me, they have to take care of. So he went back, he went to the Night Law School and finished his degree, but he also needed to, go straight to work. And so he, I could also tell a lot of stories about his work life, but I knew he had done that. And frankly, I knew that he had used that way of thinking in many, many of the other things that he did during his life. So that was, of course, in the back of my mind. Frankly, I didn't have any other lawyers in my huge family. I have a huge family in Nashville. And I have 18 first cousins. And you can imagine their families down from that, many of whom live in Nashville. And so it's a big part of my life. And now my niece and nephew are both, one is a lawyer now, and the other one is in law school now. So, but when I took these 3 years out between undergraduate school and law school because I really wasn't totally sure what I wanted to do. So, as I've told you, I've spent that first year in London, and then I came back to Nashville, and I tried a variety of things, short-term things, that were, but I could see some threads in there that that made me think, yeah, I think law and what it meant for these other things that I had done in those next 2 years. One was doing work at the state legislature with sitting beside Ned McWhirter, so I could see the political and the, just, I won't go through all of those, but those threads started to come together. And so I thought, I took the LSATs, and then I went to sit down with my father because I was, wanted him to know, and I wanted to tell him, and probably wanting his affirmation. And I was hoping that he might think about helping with the tuition. Of course, I was hoping he would do it all, but so I went to his office. His office was on the ground floor of the Life and Casualty building. It was a big glass window, and I sat down in front of him. I was all dressed up with my little bow thing that girls used to wear. Sat down in front of him, and I said, "Dad, I just want you to know I finally kind of landed, and I want to go to law school." And my father was one of those supportive, as I was growing up, fathers. He was, you can do anything you want to do. You can be president of the United States. You can, he was just like my biggest cheerleader. And he just looked at me and he said, "No, you can't do that. You won't like it. It's not good. You won't be able to get a job. It's just, don't do it. Just, you can't do it." And I, here I was in this, probably being serious and professional with my father for the first time, and just being blown out of the water. And the tears were big time. It really hit me in the gut in a big way. And it was so painful. I really can't tell you all the steps that happened between that and my going, but I ended up with a scholarship that took care of things for the first period of time at Vanderbilt Law School. And that oh me, what irony there is in things. But that scholarship was from something like the Scottish Rites or Masons or something, that was to go to a Vanderbilt student. And they never dreamed that the only person who would apply would, I don't know, there may have been other people who applied, but that it would be a woman that they would give this to. So, of course, my dad became later, and not that much later, my greatest cheerleader. And of course, my mother was too. And she was, I was always really had a respect for her nursing and her nerve to join the army and go over to Guam in the war. So she was a very important cheerleader too. But so that's how I got to law school.
It's just hearing you talk about that conversation with your father and think about this. I guess it was, I don't know, 48 years ago or so, and still seeing how it affected you. It also probably motivated you, from what I know about you. to make sure that your father would still be proud of you as a lawyer and go ahead and follow your own compass as you always have. So this is, I think, a typical question about law school. Did you like law school?
I loved law school. I really loved law school. I can't say I loved every single class, but I loved it. You know, just so fascinating, things I just never thought about, and the just the breadth of the topics, and the real starting to really understand how our world is put together. And I mean, I could go on and on, but it was I can't say, I was fascinated. That's all there is to it. And I think back now, which of course this interview has given me the chance to do, but I think about my senior paper in law school was about rape law in Tennessee as it goes back through the ages. And at the same time that I worked actually with a friend in law school to do this, and you're just so horrified by these cases, you cannot believe it. I would say, "Hey, can you believe this?" And we would, go back and forth. But what ended up being a part of that paper was to actually find out what the most progressive rape laws and sexual assault, abuse, etc. laws were that were being passed and promoted in the country, and to craft one that would work in Tennessee. And the two of us went up and testified before committees, introduced the bill, had the opportunity to try to get up laughter when legislators would say, "So you mean if I go like this to you and you weren't looking that I could go to jail?" It was enlightening in many ways, but the bill passed. It's
Congratulations.
translating things into action. That was one of the most important periods of it. But
you mentioned when you were in college that the activist part of you had not really come out, but you're talking about a real activist side here. What transformed you?
Margaret, you ask such good questions. Honestly, I think I am still in the formation. I mean, who knows what I might come out and do next, but I really feel like it's been growing. But I had such respect for people who were willing to put their voice, their marching body, I really respected these people. And so, slowly but surely, I just came to have an appreciation that you got to get out there to make a difference. And of course, just and I would sort of bounce back and forth between being the competitive me, the wanting to make a difference me, the wanting to be liked and bring people together and friendship and all of that kind of thing, me, and all of those pieces were at different points in my life starting to come together to be able to use those skills and experiences, but really seeing people who were out there, and they were doing it in the nonprofit world. They were doing it, and many of them were doing it really quietly. But I had to do a lot of listening. I mean, in my early years in Nashville, as I started into the law world, and going over to people like Colleen Waller's house and Martha Ragland's, and hearing them working to pull together things like the Women's Political Caucus and just talking about ways to make change, whether it's laws or it's modeling or it's whatever. You know, I don't have a particular something. I think it's just an accumulation of people who are willing to share things with you, and then you absorb and
Well, you certainly were out there when you were shepherding new rape legislation through the General Assembly. And then you're successful. And so you have a win. I mean, you took a risk and you had a win.
Mhm.
And how did that shape you then going forward?
um, well, you know, it feels better than losing that way. It definitely feels good to do something that can have a make a permanent change or move something forward. I mean, it really, um, I in a whatever way it sunk in, and it has made me make some decisions about, I'd start something and I'd go, it's okay not to, if the passion is not there, or like it happened with most of us, we have too many things on our plate and we can't make that difference that we should.
Just an observation. When we're in law school, there is so much focus on case law, and that's what moves the law, the cases. But you went to the legislature before you went to law school and saw how to move and make change in laws. So you're going through law school, but with that knowledge that you learned before law school,
Mhm.
you knew ways to make change that a lot of lawyers never use. And you use the power of the legislature and the power to make laws instead of going to the courts to make change. So it's a
Thanks for that
tribute
observation.
to you, Jeannie, that you were taking your education, but also your background and knowing how you're going to move move something that needed to get addressed forward. So let's talk about what, that's a lesson obviously put to use with law school. Anything else you want to share about law school? For instance, any professor, any like area of study that really, that you particularly saw yourself drawn to before we moved to your career as a lawyer?
Um, there's so many parts of it that there's not something that, and every one of them in their own way, even the ones that like that I hope that I never saw, like secure transactions, which made sure that I didn't go into banking like my family did. Um, but I really, in many ways, I was drawn to many of them. I had an accidental drawing to something that ended up being running again a thread through many of the things that where I've been, as we'll move through. But I became, can't remember the name of this, but we had a great administrative law professor. I'm not even sure why I took that course. I don't think I knew what it was. It sounded like, law management or something. And to come to that understanding in some depth of what, you can pass a law, but if you don't get those rules right, and if you don't have people enforcing those rules and regulations, those laws don't mean much. And they're only the start. And I got to be this professor was a national guru in administrative law, and headed the administrative law section of everything. And so I was his assistant. He was nice enough to give me little higher title, but that has just turned out to be a thread through all of the ways I've used law.
So you graduate from law school. Where did you go? I mean, was your dad right? You couldn't get a job? Did you? I mean, what happened next?
Yeah. So I went to work with, I had actually clerked with during the summers, what was then Gullett, Sanford, Gullett, Steele, Sanford, Robinson, and Merritt. And so
Those are some great names,
oh,
legends of the bar.
oh, you are so right. And I could not have been luckier. And so I clerked with them, and then they hired me to be, to be an associate. And it's again, it could take this whole program for me to talk about what it meant to be around those people and to be mentored and tutored and thrown in the deep end but to know that they trusted I could swim and not hurt a client, for example. But they were so, as a group, they were so community minded and civic minded and really encouraged, applauded anything that you wanted to do that was outside your direct law, where you had to be billing for it. I mean, it was just, it could not have suited my my future and my personality better. I mean, if I'll just go down quickly, I mean, my two main mentors in there were Val Sanford, who I would argue has got, at least then when I was in active law practice, but the best brain, the best analytic brain. I think about when all the judges in the state came to him to file a lawsuit about their pensions. And he was so exacting and so perfect, but frankly, so accepting, because he was just in a league of his own. Gil Merritt, who many of you know, went on to be on the Sixth Circuit. He said one of those sets of words to me that made me go, okay, maybe that's, it had to do with a real talent at mediation and bringing things together. And he ran for Congress during the time that I was a young lawyer with that firm, and so his offices were one floor down, so I got ingrained in some of that, and his friendship with John Sigenthal. I mean, it just like was a magic opening to so many things. Jack Robinson, the prince of ethics and professionalism, just imbued so many values in me. And Thomas Wardlaw Steele. I mean, here was the man who was the chancellor. He must have been a chancellor at age 20 or something, because he was the person who did Baker versus Carr, the base level, the first case about first level of the courts of that. So, and the stories these people had. Mr. Gullett was all involved in the ABA. He was called the kingmaker. You could tell who was going to become the next president of the ABA by who he was involved with in grooming. And so I got these visions of the world, but I got a really great grounding in law and in the judgment calls and how they needed to be made. And I know I've forgotten people in that firm, but I could not have started in a better place. And when I was hired, and I always want to be careful with this, but I was the only woman in a firm of any size. There were some, there were some other people in private practice, but they were, they were maybe with one other person or on their own because it was just so hard. And I can remember other big law firms calling the people at my law firm saying, how is it? Can you put your feet up on the desk? Can you smoke your cigars? I'm sure there was laughter going on, but but I have to do a shout out to one of my really longest, closest friends, Lynn Todd Edgerton, who actually, like 2 years before that, she'd gone straight to law school. 2 years before that, she actually spent 6 months, I think, at the firm, at Gullett firm, and then moved out of town. But so they had a little taste, and so
That was 1975, is that right? That's when you were hired.
right.
So there weren't really women mentors, and these men were really the bedrock of you learning not only how to practice law, but how to be involved in the community and with bar associations and in politics.
Exactly.
What kind of law were you doing?
Some of everything. And that has proved to be valuable. And so I just, you name it, I did it. And a lot of it was business. You put threads at business litigation, and then a number of the cases and things that I was involved with did turn on, as it turned out, administrative law. A lot of healthcare law, a lot of telecommunications. AT&T was breaking up, and they'd come to Val Sanford, and he put me on it with him, and then you can go down the line in these trucks. I represented a lot of trucking firms, and some of those were not so used to seeing a young girl at the time. So that started to give you, courage and legs and confidence. And but really, I did some of everything. The firm had large clients like AT&T and banking institutions and things like that. But they also, for example, we handled CBS in Nashville, not the CBS Records contracts, but things that had national import. And so I got to work on a lot of those. And one of my favorite cases was a 60 Minutes case. And you can imagine how many lawsuits they have against their investigative reporting, probably even to this day. But this was one where Mike Wallace was sued, and all about a guy who was a Elvis impersonator, and he had been told that he was going to be a star, and this Elvis impersonator was not a star. And so anyway, it was a really a great case. So I got to go up to New York and see how the bowels of 60 Minutes works, and be in deposition with Mike Wallace. But so it was a huge variety of law practice.
What was your starting salary? Do you remember?
Mm-hmm. It was $14,000 a year.
I think that was pretty big money, wasn't it?
It was. The firm claimed that it was the highest that any new associate was being paid. So, but I was like, I never said a word. I was thrilled.
What opportunities did you get in bar associations and and in leadership roles?
Yeah. Well, I think it's pretty obvious there weren't a lot of women, and certainly not a lot of women in private practice, even for a few years after I had started. And I have to say that as much as the people in my law firm were um, ground zero for getting me started professionally. The women who had come out of law school shortly after I did, or had gone into some other kinds of practice even before, they were the biggest inspiration to me, the biggest inspiration. And, I could start down that list. It certainly starts with Judge Daughtry and the fabulous Margaret Bim and many, but it was it was a sort of a lunch crowd, and there were, some of those more activist activities going on, like tables you weren't supposed to sit at different restaurants, but let's do it, and the YMCA and being able to use it and things like that. So that was sort of going on the side of but really critical too. So in the bar association world, again, because there weren't a lot of private practice women, I know I got exceptional opportunities, some because, maybe I was acceptable, kind of nobody was worried about, what this woman might, the changes that people were so worried we could bring to things. So anyway, I was, at one point, I was the vice president of the Nashville Bar Association. I was the Middle Tennessee, and this was way early. I was the Middle Tennessee, I guess they call it governor, Middle Tennessee vice president, governor, or whatever, of the Tennessee Bar Association. And again, that was thanks to Harris Gilbert, who has always been one of those people who I would see, no matter what I was doing in life since then, has just been I felt a virtual pat on the back always. And he's the one he was leaving it to go be the president of the leaving that position to go be the president of the TBA, and he handpicked me to be the Middle Tennessee vice president. And I was on the board of professional responsibility at one point for a period, and just was very involved in a lot of different parts of it, and of course was early in the foundation of the Lawyers Association for Women, and actually we had a lawyers women law students association that we founded when I was in law school too.
So Jeannie, how long did you stay with the firm? What was your path, your growth path with the firm?
Yeah, so I started, and became a partner in 4 years after I started, and I was there for 13 years. In the meantime, during that period, I had certainly been getting involved in a lot of community activities, and in addition to a deep caring and involving and living the women's world, I had begun to get very involved in environmental issues as a community person. So that was sort of coming along at the same time too.
What triggered your interest in the environment?
It's so hard to really go all the way back, but I was always an outdoor person. I was always a very athletic, spent huge amounts of time outdoors. So I came at the natural resources, honestly. But a couple of things happened early on. One, John Williams, another, he'd been one of those MBA friends, and he was very interested in the environment, and he had invited me to a meeting of the Environmental Action Fund. And the next meeting, they elected me president. Obviously, they were low on candidates, and so, but that got me into some volunteer lobbying at the state legislature, and a sense of just how pitifully the world at that time was taking care of any of their natural resources. So that started that. But then Shortly after that, I joined the board of an organization called the Southern Environmental Law Center that was being founded, and by actually a guy from Birmingham, Alabama, who had gotten out of Yale Law School, worked for a national environmental legal organization, and realized the Southeast was being completely ignored and was frankly going down the tubes in terms of the environment. And so he had decided he was going to launch out. Turns out that his roommate at the UVA and at Yale Law School was one of those people at MBA who I had gotten to know so well in high school and college and been such a good friend, and said, "Oh, you're thinking about Tennessee? I've got an idea." And so about the second year of the organization, they asked me if I would join the board. And don't tell any governance people, but I'm still on that board. And so that's a whole different story, but so devoted. And I think it is one of the most effective and least best kept secrets in the Southeast and now nationally, because their precedents are the things that are being taken to the United States Supreme Court to make law and defend laws all over the country.
So once again, you are help founding something, a co-founder of something that has grown into a nationally recognized force. When was that, when you helped found the organization? So just to get a sense of when that happened, and of course you're still involved now.
Yeah. So there's so many people that founded that organization. I would like to, brush that away, but I do feel like I've been an important part of the foundation of it and continuing. But that would have been, since the organization is now 32 years old, 34 years old. So let's see if I still got some.
Late 80s, right?
The 80s, yes.
And I believe you served as chair of its board for how long?
8 years.
And that was 2010 through, when was that?
It was, oh gosh, it starts to all blur, but I think it was earlier than that, maybe 2007 to I'll go look at the wooden bowl they gave me, to 2014, 15. So, but yeah.
So you've been at the firm now for 13 years. And so we're in the late 80s again, where we talked about the Southern Environmental Law Center starting. Mm-hmm. Why'd you leave? Sounds like it was such a great place to work. What took you away from the law firm?
Well, in case you haven't noticed, I am interested in lots of things. And so, so the immediate thing that took me away from the law firm was a leave of absence that I took from the law firm in 1988 to head the Tennessee campaign, the Tennessee Gore for President campaign. Not to belabor that, but he was a youngster, like 39, maybe 40, and he ran for president of the United States. And I was, the campaign manager for Tennessee, which was a fascinating experience, alongside Margaret Bem, who was Davidson County, Middle Tennessee, part of that campaign, and we did great. We got more votes than any of the other candidates in their home state. So, but alas, he didn't win. But so I did that, and then when I was coming back to come back to join the firm. Your mind starts to think, even when you get away for just a short period of time. And I had learned a lot in that campaign, a lot about national press, a lot about, fighting with the national headquarters to get your candidate there. I just had learned a lot. And so I started thinking about, what do I want to do? And I actually had gone back to the firm and talked to them about, I'd like to change my practice to being all environmental law. And they had been great about it. And they were going to even give me some, let me go do something else on Fridays. I mean, it was just, they were so great about it. And then that summer, so Gore gets out after Super Tuesday, and my husband and I go to Alaska to mountain climb for about 6 weeks, and I come back and I talk to the firm, and straight back from Alaska, I went to the Sixth Circuit Judicial Conference up in Virginia, and Charles Burson, who had, when Margaret headed Nashville, he headed Memphis for that Gore campaign. And so Charles and his wife were at the Sixth Circuit Judicial Conference, and we spent a chunk of time together. I came back to Nashville and was working with the firm about how to transition my practice. And I get this call from Charles Burson, who says, I'm in Nashville. I'm in the basement of the Legislative Plaza. Will you come over here and meet me real quick? And I thought, oh Lord, what's this? So, but it was fascinating enough. I went over and he said, the Supreme Court has just called me and they want to appoint me to be Attorney General of Tennessee. Will you leave your law practice and come be chief deputy with me, and we'll have a great time. We'll work on national cases. You can do whatever you want. You can be in charge of the environmental area, the consumer, or anything you want. Do you want to do it? And I said, yes. So, it was like, okay, the perfect job for to bring together my interest in policy and in all kinds of issues and in politics. And so that was the change. It just, I don't know, it just happened and it turned out to be great. I mean, Tennessee had never had a female chief deputy, and I got to work closely with Knox Walkup, who became Solicitor General, and then, and so it was great. I mean, Charles had enormous independence. Ended up getting to lead the chief deputies group. That's all the chief deputies around the country. Some of the finest people I have ever known. I was crazy about all the attorney generals too. So we spent a lot of time on national cases and we started, thanks to Kate Eiler, and we started a whole management training for chief deputies and for attorney general's offices, because a lot of them are great lawyers, but they don't know, they haven't been trained in management and those kinds of skills. So that helped the whole country and helped, anyway, I won a big award about that, but it really should have been handed directly to Kate Eiler. So that's
without question, is amazing team that you and General Burson put together at the Attorney General's office. And there you are again with your administrative law background, going and dealing with that. Exactly. I mean, that is what you're dealing with state laws and regulations, defending them and help crafting them and giving opinions.
Politics.
What in particular do you recall? I mean, you've told us a little bit about that, but can you tell us how long you were there and just any particular moment that you particularly remember?
Well, I was there for 4 years. And that was at the end of that was interrupted by a leave of absence also. So, um, but gosh, there were so many at times that
Is
come
there
to.
anything on the environmental front? Because you mentioned on the environment that you were interested in doing
Yeah,
something there.
yeah. Well, it was a very early period of environmental law. It's still early at that period, and it was very small. Um, Great guy named Mike Kerrigan headed that that area at the time, and um, so I should know better, but and J.W. Luna was head of the department, and so things were really, I guess I would say, running well. It was not a seriously challenged period, but I think in part that was because some of the precedent for the laws that needed to be interpreted and moved forward had not blossomed in the way that they should. But I was learning the whole time, but I can't really say that there were some big cases and
Well,
I'll get back to you on that one, but it
I
was
certainly revisit uh, the environment again in the 90s with you, obviously, with another job, that big deal job that you
yeah.
took on. But what happened in 92, 4 years later, where you leave the Attorney General's office? Why'd you do that?
Well, um, I was up at a National Association of Attorneys General um, meeting, and so it was attorneys general and their chief deputies, and it was in Pittsburgh, in fact, and I got a call from Tipper Gore. The Gore's been longtime friends, and Tipper said that Al was going to be put on the ticket with Clinton um, to, as his vice presidential candidate, and it was going to be um, announced the next morning. And couldn't tell anybody, and nobody knows about that, etc. And so she said, "Would you help us?" She said, "Al's got his whole Senate staff. He can just move over, and uh, and they need, and I need somebody I know and trust, and I um, also somebody who knows his staff, so the whole thing can blend and work well, and knows politics, et cetera, et cetera." And so I said, "Well, let's talk tomorrow." She said, "Well, we have to leave for the convention like in 3 days or something." And I said, "Well, look, okay, I'll go to the convention with you, but you know, you just probably need a pro for a national campaign. Let's talk about it." Blah, blah. So, funny anecdote though, I got a call in the middle of the night, like 3 or 4 in the morning, and from the ABC affiliate in Pittsburgh saying, "I've been down at the foot of the Gore's farm in Carthage, and I keep hearing your name. Larry Dockery said your name, and I know you're, a friend of the Gores, and I know you're involved in campaigns, blah blah blah, and etc. And would can I want to send a car tomorrow morning to drive you to the affiliate and have you be on whatever ABC this morning or something, just talking about the Gores. You don't have to say anything about whether they're going to be the people or not." I said, "Oh, sure, sure." Anyway, so that's um, so anyway, I went to the convention. My husband and I flew up to New York with the Gores and Senator and Ms. Gore Sr. and their kids, and on this big plane, and we landed there and got in this swirl that just was, is a adventure of a lifetime. We had no idea what was happening. Will was just coming for the fun of it. He's sitting in that plane, sitting by Al, and he says, "Hey, Al, why don't we go jog tomorrow in Central Park?" And Al goes, I'm sure Al was going, "Oh boy, are you in the fight?" So anyway, I was in the meantime in the back reading all the briefing books, trying to see what to go on. But so anyway, that's a whole much longer story. But went to the convention, and for those of you who were involved in around watching that campaign, got on the bus trip, and after the convention, and what I was, I think I had to. I'm always having to talk to my counselor Margaret about what should my title be. I'm just going to be kind of around, and my God, Jeannie, you're the campaign manager for one of the 4 principles of the of a national campaign, and so
It was a pretty big job.
it
Yeah.
was a huge job,
And you said yes.
I said yes. Yes.
And they won.
And that was the biggest surprise, frankly. But it was, yeah, that was amazing. So anyway, I as I was heading up there at some point in that, of course, I had to take take a leave of absence to even do the convention. So I called Charles and I said, "Hey, can I have a leave of absence from the Attorney General's office?" And he said, "Of course." And he said, "Just so you'll keep me up from the road on what's going on." I said, "Of course, that's part of our deal, to have fun in what we're doing." So, and then, as many of you know, not too many years into the Clinton Gore administration, Charles came up, and he was the vice president's counsel and then chief of staff. So anyway, that's
So
so
this interview is going on a little bit, but just anything that you want to share about being Tipper Gore's campaign manager. I don't know, the kiss or anything like that, or that was memorable. But did you engineer that, Judy?
yeah, sure.
But anything that stands out that would be, I mean, sleepless nights, constantly awake, constantly learning how to pivot, and
It was
knowing how to talk. I mean,
everything you're saying in spades. I mean, it's just you're watching everything that your principal, everything that's being reported about them. And the great thing is that Tipper Gore is one of the greats of our world, in all that she cares about, and everything related to mental health. But she is just a kind, smart, hilarious, amazing human being. And so, we had a lot of adventures, and it's all the intersections of both the Clintons and the Gores and their administrations, and there's just story after story, and I wouldn't trade a second of that experience. Being back behind the podium at the convention where Tipper's practicing her talk, and it's magic. And then having sitting down with James Carville and George Stephanopoulos as they talk to you about what the Clinton Gore policies are going to be, and that it's your job to make sure that nobody says something that is contradictory. And it's just, the whole thing is amazing. And it's and so I can't
well,
really.
it also was a ton of pressure, and she was right to trust you. You really pulled through for her. They win, and what's next for Jeannie Nelson?
Well, yeah. So I, when I got involved in this, it was not, everybody says, oh, you got involved in that campaign so you could go work in Washington. And my first response was, I never thought these people were going to win. Not that I didn't want them to win, but I didn't think they had a chance. And so, but lo and behold, things started to look good. And Tipper thought that I would come and be her chief of staff in the White House. And, I just said, I can't, I'm a lawyer. To begin with, there are just so many skills you need in that role, to steer someone right. For example, don't wear dresses to balls, and you need to look right. There's all kinds of things you need. And I'm not an expert in mental health and all the things you want to move forward. So she said, well, you will come to Washington, won't you? So, well, I don't go anywhere without my unbelievable husband, and I just don't know. I don't know. We talk about it later. Let me get you a new chief of staff. Let's, to take over. Should they win? This was 3 weeks out. So anyway, as things moved along, I mean, I then came to understand the challenges of actually getting a position, much less one that you would like in the administration. And it's almost impossible for both a husband and wife, two members of the same family, because there are very, very few political appointments. And so, but as it turned out, Will, and this just made me so happy, and it has been such a addition to his life as well as mine. And we both got positions in the environmental world, and he became the international policy head for NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which means he negotiated treaties all over the world, fish treaties, ocean treaties, and took that Tennessee great corporate kind of negotiator, thinker into the world, nationally and internationally. So. And we just had an unbelievable adventure, and so I was nominated to be the general counsel for the Environmental Protection Agency, and fortunately, some of my favorite women came up for my hearing, my Senate hearing, which turned out to be not. It was not like the things that you see on television. It was a very, very friendly thing. And that's one of my favorite pictures from the whole time up there, because it turned into a big challenge of a job, a huge challenge of a job. And so that's how I left the Attorney General's office.
Well, it is a big deal to have a Senate confirmation position, and to put yourself forward and say, okay, I can do this. And with the Environmental Protection Agency being such an important part of what the vice president's agenda was, the environment. So you took it on, and but it was a challenge, and it was a challenge. Why? Why was it so? I mean, besides the fact that it's complex and there are lots of rules and regulations, again, your interest in administrative law, and obviously politically, it's a charged agency. Why was it particularly challenging at that time period for you?
Well, on a number of levels, it was probably the most significant thing that happened while I was general counsel at EPA. When I came into the office, the Democrats were in control of the House, and 2 years later, the Democrats were no longer in control, and the Republicans had taken over. The Republicans had not had the majority in the House for, I think it was 30 years up until that point. So you can imagine they had 30 years worth of things that they wish were different. And they'd been planning for it. Newt Gingrich was the leader of all of that. And they had been promising the world that they would. The language was things like take down EPA. You know, it was like, and so that really made things tough. Let's just put it that way. From a lot of standpoints, they really wanted to, eviscerate EPA. That's the only way I can put it. And they went to work to try to change as many regulations and laws if they could as possible. And they were using really tactics that sound like some things that go on now, but I'm not talking about violence, but they would want, I'll just give you an example. They would let us know at the agency, and there were, 20,000 employees at EPA and spread all over the country, but they would let us know that they wanted every piece of paper in the agency that used X word, and they wanted them by Monday morning. This would be Friday afternoon, and wanted them by Monday morning. And that, of course, you got to date stamp them. You got to make sure that it's just, it was really, really tough. Let's just put it that way. And, but again, I have to say, the leaders in the agency, the people who were head of water and air and all of this became so close, and many of them were lawyers also. So we could come together and try to put together where policy and law could work. Now they were pushing policies, and I was like, I don't think there's a good. And so General Counsel's office is, like many of us as lawyers, is a referee, a policeman. It's inherently a tough position in one of these agencies, but made that much more difficult. And of course, the Vice President Gore, wanted as many good things as could happen as possible. It was also a period when Clinton and Gore were really emphasizing that you can have a good environment and a good economy. So what that means is business wanted the good economy, the environmentalists wanted a good environment, and they weren't so enthusiastic about the other pieces. So there were huge pressures during that time, and so I could go on, and a lot of different things happened, but it was.
I remember you told me two things in particular that struck me. One was that there was so much pressure in these jobs that the tenure was like 21 months, 18 to 21 months is,
Yep.
How long the typical tenure was.
Of a general counsel.
Of a general counsel. And also that this subpoena power was just so difficult that they just kept on with more and more subpoenas, like you were talking about, with short time frames. And I remember you saying that because they were asking for so much information like they were, that you feared that people would not write down for history's sake their impressions or what they were doing, because it would just get subpoenaed and would be used in such a way to hurt you politically. And you were worried about in that environment, what is our history, and what, and people keeping notes. And I think that expresses too the kind of pressure you are under and our public officials are under in these environments.
No, you're exactly right. And I do feel for the lawyers in these positions. I mean, my um, two back predecessors, one of them had been so concerned about what he was being asked to say that he resigned. And the night before he resigned, he put a memo under the doors of the department, the Justice Department that handled environmental things, and the department at the agency, and left. And he's, a well-respected, I won't even say where he's a professor, but he is. So it's, but without, I don't think you could do it if you didn't have a really deep foundation. And, I was not as in depth. I hadn't been a professor at some law school looking at every little detail of environmental law. And so I particularly had to really depend on really my Nashville and my Tennessee background and founding of confidence, of friends like Margaret, who came up to my Senate hearing, knowing that when I left Washington, that even if that there were, I still had the respect and the friendship, and that was going to carry me through. But most importantly, on a day-to-day basis, I knew right from wrong. I knew, that I mean, of course, seems like there's nothing black and white in the law, but there are ranges that are, and you really had to stand on that, and you had to be comfortable that that you were going to be able to respect yourself, and that you were doing the right thing for the country. And it's so without going in with that, I don't see how anybody could do it.
So you stayed there how long? And then what did you do?
So I was there. I got over the 21 months, I think. But what I did was then I became a counselor to the administrator of EPA. And I spent most of that time over in the White House, and doing some, back and forth between the agency. And but I got to do two amazing things. Well, one of these I've done while I was general counsel. I got to be on the U.S. delegation to the Cairo Population and Development Conference, and fly over on Air Force Two, and you have to have a few little perks in between the sleepless nights as general counsel. So that was a real privilege, and just amazing thing. And then when I went over into the White House, I did a lot of projects with the Council on Environmental Quality that pulls together the different agencies and the environmental issues they're working on, and tries to kind of make sure that they're the different agencies and departments are, symbiotic, and using some of the same interpretations of policy, et cetera. So I did work there, but I also I got to be a couple of us who were environmental delegates on the United States delegation to Beijing for the Fourth World Conference on Women, and spent 3 weeks in Beijing, rooming with my good friend who was the appointee to the World Bank and on the delegation, and experiencing, again, it just like, the delegation was led by Hillary Clinton. It was Madeleine Albright, Dorothy Height. I could just, sometimes I just feel like I just sort of toppled down from a helicopter sometimes, and just landed in, how did I get here? How did this happen? But it was
So were you there when Hillary Clinton said women's rights are human rights?
Yes, by the luck of the draw, I was on about the 10th row, sitting right in front of her when she did that. And, I frankly didn't appreciate, I've come now to appreciate, and certainly right after that, the depth of what that sentence meant to the world. And I'd had so much respect for Hillary actually going and leading that delegation. The country had just gotten in some really bad things related to our views on, good from our standpoint, but related to China and their human rights issues, and there were other issues going on too. And so the whole State Department and I think most of the White House did not want Hillary to go. And it would be giving the Chinese government some kind of validation, they were afraid. And she knew that she had a message for that could help strengthen women all over the world. And she was willing to stand up and go and hope they would trust her not to portray things with the Chinese, which of course she was not going to. And so that really was, talk about watching leadership in action from so many different angles. That was amazing. And I personally got the luck leading up to going over there to working with her on one of the things she wanted to take to this conference, and it related to microcredit and a way for the United States to both help other countries and accelerate what we were doing in our country about microcredit.
So of course, Vice President Gore and President Clinton had to run again in 1996. Did you have a role in that campaign?
Not very much. I went to the convention, and there are really strict rules, and I have a low tolerance for even going a little over those, or stretching any of those rules. So no, I was in the federal government. I took a leave of absence, and I helped at the convention, but I did not. I was not active in that campaign.
So tell us then, from EPA and these jobs that you had, are we now up to 2000 when Gore is running for president? Have we kind of taken your career path to that point?
Yes.
So now we're in the 2000 campaign, and his campaign's here in Nashville, where his national headquarters was.
Yes.
You have a role in that campaign.
Yes. So again, it all came about through my leave of absence. I had, and we can come back to this if you want, but we had come back from Washington shortly before the administration ended. The first Clinton Gore, the second Clinton Gore administration had ended. We had come back to Nashville, and I had gotten involved with starting the Land Trust for Tennessee. And we'd come back dominantly because both Will's mother and my mother and my father were in ill health. So we came back, and I got involved with the Land Trust, and then the Gore campaign got started, and I once they moved the campaign headquarters to Nashville, I checked out all the rules from nonprofits and took a leave of absence from the Land Trust, and was the campaign manager for Tipper, for Ms. Gore. guess I should flip over the names, but and that was in Nashville, and we were over in Metro Center, and it was a great chance to be back with some of the doers I knew I could totally depend on, and Margaret was in there, and it was and other great people doing, and some terrific people who have become friends of all of ours from that campaign. But
So now this time you have the potential first lady, not the potential second lady. Very high stakes like it was before. And it's close, as we all know. As we look at history. Can you talk about where you were the night that the votes came in and when Vice President Gore decided not to concede?
The Gores, waiting for the returns to come in, had been at the Lowe's, Vanderbilt Plaza. So Will and I were at the Lowe's, and we then the time came to, we were watching all the back and forth with the Florida vote, but it came time for the vice president to go down to the Legislative Plaza. And so we got in, there were a series of vehicles taking the people from the Lowe's down there, down to the plaza. And so we got out on the Charlotte side and went down underneath some, and we went in before the Gores did. And so we were down around the corner going in, and then we heard what we could tell was Al, et cetera, and his people right around him, I guess the Secret Service coming down that same kind of tunnel like thing that goes to a room at the end of this tunnel underneath. And so, I saw Al and gave him a hug and said, and he said, "Take it easy, it's not over yet." And I went, things are changing. I should have, of course, I should have written down exactly what he said, but those 3 sentences were in there somehow. And lo and behold, that's when he went back down to the room at the end of this tunnel and made that call that he was not conceding. So that was where we were. And oh my God. And so for the next, what was that, 6 weeks, I didn't go down to Florida to any of the voting things, but I was on the call that the senior strategists were having about where things were and which direction they were going to try next, and what the odds of it were, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah.
As you reflect back on that now, and of course what we've been through just recently here in with the presidential election of 2020, what was going on in your head then? Can you remember in 2000? I mean, obviously you had worked with the Gores for so long, believed in them and what they could bring to the country. What was in your mind?
This time I really thought they were going to win. But I was just so confident that this was going to be one of the best things that could happen for our country. And I had experienced the kind of leadership that I knew that Vice President Gore would do I'd experienced the people around him who I knew would be leading our country. I mean, it uh, it's hard and really too painful to try to even bring back those feelings. It was just this, this can't be true. I mean, there's nobody who could ever have been as experienced. And of course, I didn't really have a lot of faith in George Bush and his level of experience. And so the comparison did just seemed not one that I could rationally make.
Well, I appreciate you trying, and I think did a great job of articulating that disappointment and your belief and acting on your belief to do what you could to see him get elected. You mentioned, and I want to go into two areas before we finish. One, I want you to talk about your amazing husband.
Thank you.
You've given us a little bit of insight already, just something about your personal life, your grandchildren, etc. And then one of your greatest legacies of all, we're going to talk about the land trust because that is such an accomplishment. So tell us about Will.
Oh my gosh. Well, we just celebrated our 39th anniversary. And I know one should go to stories, and I know that superlatives sound like superlatives, but he is the finest person. He has the finest mind, and and he is the greatest partner in life you could possibly have. The degree to which we have so much in common, our serious commitment to the environment and, nationally, regionally, both doing oceans now together on a board. And his commitment to that, he's got a mind, a legal mind that finds the paths to yes in the strongest, ethically sound. He's obviously my hero, and I think that just hearing my story, I stop and I think, wow, how could anybody have been married to somebody who jumped around as much and who, but he's just so supportive, and he's so, the confidence that he gives me, the freedom he gives me, he's just a great human being, and he has done amazing things for the world, frankly. And the way he's done it is in this understated way, but boy, does he ever achieve things in the right way. And I love him to death, and he's the best. And Margaret's nice.
I totally agree. Will Martin has an interview of his own for the Nashville Bar Association and what he has accomplished as a lawyer.
Yes.
But he has really been a soulmate to you. What about other members of your family?
Well, my stepson and stepdaughter, with whom I am extremely close, are terrific human beings too. stepdaughter lives here in Nashville, and she is a multi-talented person. Her name is Ann Martin, and she's she has done and tried all kinds of things, and she's right now using some real talents in bridge, but in and coaching and teaching, but also using all those various other things. And she's a no telling what she'll do next, but it will be a gift to whoever and whatever cause it is. So, and my stepson Whit is went to Anne went to so Anne has several different sets of degrees above her college degree. Started at Georgetown and did a variety of things since then, but and would have made a great lawyer. She was a paralegal for a while, but she chose not to. So Whit has his business degree from Vanderbilt, and he he's not far from the chippo out of his dad's block, as is Anne with her values. And so, but Whit worked in New York for a long time, married a fabulous young woman who had dual citizenship, but grew up mostly in England. And she was in the business world in Manhattan. And she and Whit have 2 children. So I have 2 grandchildren, one of whom is 12 years old, William, and one of whom is 10, Eliza. And they just, make our lives fabulous. But Whit and Lauren and the two grandchildren are moving back to Nashville. They lived in New York, in Manhattan first, then in Houston, and then they've been in Paris, France for the last 3 years, and are now moving to Nashville. So, and as I said earlier, I've got this platform of cousins, and my sister-in-law Merritt she's just courage over the top and a fine person. And my brother Charlie is terrific, and he brings out all the good in me and everybody who's around. And as I said, his 2 children are my niece and nephew are both going to be in the lawyer world. So that's really great. And Charlie's wife, Amy, is a superb teacher and carer of children. So,
well, I know personally that you've been inspiration to your niece and nephew to go to law school. And this interview absolutely indicates why. I want you to talk now about the Land Trust of Tennessee. And you alluded to it earlier. How did it get started? And it sounds like it's a familiar frame here, that someone just calls you up and says, or you have an idea, hey, let's go do something never been done before, and do you want to do it? But anyway, could you tell us how you started the Land Trust?
Well, Margaret, the truth of the matter is it's the only one that I've done without taking a leave of absence to do. So here we go. It's a first. But anyway, we were coming back to Nashville. I was trying to think about, what I might want to do next. And I was still doing some stuff in Washington, going back and forth. So I was just having a conversation with Byron Trauger and Phil Bredesen. And, Byron had a particular idea, and we were talking about it. And then Phil said, how about this? He said, one of the things I want to do, Phil was mayor at the time. And he said, this is the way I remember it, of course, but he said, when I get out of being mayor, one of the things I want to do, one of the things I think we have a gap about, is I want to start a statewide land trust. Now, I'm not sure I'd ever heard of land trusts before, but I said, ah, interesting. And he said, but I'll do it now if you'll do it with me. And I said, let's do it. And so um, that's really how that happened. I mean, maybe I did a little research in between some of that, but that's really how it happened. And I think a lot of us know that Phil Rosen is great at seeing gaps and going after and getting things done. So I knew enough about him. Will and I had worked on a project for him when he first became mayor, looking for all the open space in Davidson County we could find that Phil wanted to set aside all the land he could to bank for parks for the next 100 years. And so we trespassed a little and looked for something. So anyway, he said, so we put together it's not a sophisticated business plan. We just kind of got in there. We just did enough research, and we thought who'd be really good to get involved. We had them over to Phil's house in front of his fire, talked about land trusts, and Phil has a house in Jackson Hole, Wyoming that's on land trust protected property. So he knew what it was out in Jackson Hole. So, I got in touch with what I thought sounded like the best land trust in the country. We brought them down here. We got a group of people, as I said, to his house in front of the fire, described kind of what this was. And we knew some of these people knew a little bit about land trusts from places that they vacation. And we started it. And it's been going now for 20 years. And it's, we've protected over, 140,000 acres and, 300 or 400 different projects. And it's permanent. These lands are being protected permanently. Some of them are being turned into parks, but most of them are private lands that will be here forever for all of our children and grandchildren. And it's couldn't be a more satisfying thing.
When you have definitely been the face of the land trust before you retired, what year was that?
It was in 2016.
And the amount of community interest and impact throughout the state is probably more than you ever imagined when you started this with Phil Bredesen. And I think it was also hard for people to understand just what the land trust did, but now people get it. But could you just explain how you go about preserving all this land, and in a simple way, so that anybody who wonders, well, what is the land trust? They know if they're watching.
Right. Well, Land Trust is a nonprofit, and they work dominantly with private landowners who want to be sure that their land stays in its natural state forever. So they enter into what's called a conservation easement that is placed on their land, goes with their deed forever. But they continue to own the land. They can sell it, they can give it away to their kids, but the land will always have these restrictions on it. And I can't tell you how many families this has been the answer to their prayers, and sometimes the prayers they didn't even know that they had. They could see that there would be troubles down the line because who would continue to own it, and how is this family's history and legacy going to be preserved, and how are the wetlands that will help our birds still have places to land, and how will we continue to have farmland because we need places for people to live, but we also need open spaces. So the lands that are protected for all kinds of purposes. But that's the essence of it. And you know, a lot of people want to give their land to become a park, but they want to make sure that it isn't going to get sold for something else. So they'll put one of these things on the deed, and then they'll sell it to the city to become a park. Put one of these conservation easements on, and then they sell it. And now the land trust people have started to give us their land, and we put a conservation easement on it. You still say we, and they will give it to us. We'll put it, and we'll sell it, or we'll whatever. But those restrictions will always be there, and the land trust responsibility is to make sure that those restrictions are kept, and that there's no change to that. So you have an ongoing, perpetual organization, because it's got a whole fund to fund the checking every year on that land. And it's, you know, people sleep a lot better, and people putting these on for their wills. There's a lot of ways to deal with it, but that's the essence. If you want your land, your forest, your whatever to be that way forever, then that's who you should call and explore with it. 244 land, 615-244 land. So,
you know, we've talked about what you have done with the environment. We have talked about what you've done for women and politics, constant themes of your life. You left the land trust in 2016, but I know you have not retired. So if you could just tell us what you've done with in the environment. I'm going to take each of these three since you stopped working at the land trust. Greenways, your national boards. If you could just tell us what they are so that we can get a glimpse of you now.
Yeah. Well, I'm still on the board of the Southern Environmental Law Center, and head of the governance committee, and working on the transition for them to a new executive director. And it's still so fulfilling, and some of the best friends in my life are on that, affiliated with it, and they are making such a difference. Our Southeast, we are setting precedents that, you know, the sea turtles still have a beach to lay their eggs on, thanks to them. You know, that we're not having half the pollution from bad stuff coming out of coal-fired plants that we did, and cleaning up all the coal ash, the residue from our electrical factories that was going into our waters. I mean, there's no way to say what the difference that they're making, and I'm totally still and just as engaged with that as I've ever been. So, Southern Environmental Law Center, I'm on the Greenways Commission, and the Greenways for Nashville, which is it's the nonprofit that supports the work of parks and the work of the Greenways Commission to accelerate our greenways. And we've got some incredible plans. We really need to tie all of Nashville together. We already have 100 miles of greenways in the city, but it's been down the rivers and the waterways. And now it's like, okay, we need to tie all the urban parts of our city together. So I'm working really hard on a project related to that. And actually, Will and I started the Greenways for Nashville Greenways with Phil Bredesen when he was first elected mayor. So that's kind of was the first head of the commission, co-head commission. So it's bringing that back together with that, and of course, lots of walks, and serving on the board of the Ocean Conservancy, which is a national and international organization. I mean, our oceans are 70% of the globe, and they are seriously threatened by lots of aspects of climate change and of plastics, and on and on and on. So and we eat those fish for the protein, and we don't need that dying. And so, so those are the major things. I had spent a long time, I guess 12 years, on the board of the National Land Trust Alliance, which is the organization that all the 1,500 land trusts across the country. There are only like 3 statewide ones, of which the Land Trust for Tennessee is one, but they're township ones and all kinds of different. So they set all the standards for that, and lobby and that kind of thing. So that's, I think, and then of course I walk all the time. I haven't had a chance to get this in, but one of the best things about the 2000 campaign that for president that of the Gores, they may have lost, but I won the lottery. Margaret and I left the one day in the midst of just too much going on in the campaign headquarters. We headed outside on a walk, and we have been walking 2 mornings a week for the last 20 years. As I told her, 10 million steps now that you can tell how far you're going. And it's, we've solved the problems of the world. Just kidding. But we.
No, you're not kidding. Yeah. So
Oh,
let's go to women. And what have you been doing in regard to promoting women and empowering women?
Well, you know, in overall, in everything I'm involved in, I look for ways for women to play a part, start their steps up into leadership roles, and recruit, and, you know, coffees and everything I can do to try to channel anything that they would want to know about. But for the last going on 3 years, right? 2.5 years. I've been involved with this unbelievable project at the downtown library called Votes for Women, and talk about a fun project to initiate, a challenging project, everything about it. But the best part is that it's the triumvirate of people that invented this and have been carrying it before it gets totally adopted by the library and the Library Foundation are Margaret Baum and Julie Mosley. And we just briefly, what it is that many of you know that the 19th Amendment that gave women the right to vote was 100 years old this past August. And it, because of the COVID and things kind of shutting down, we can kind of pretend like now is the 100th year. But what we have done is to raise the almost, I guess, $4 million to do a special room place in our world-class downtown library that is committed to the commemoration and celebration around women of this anniversary. And the reason it is because women's stories have not been told in the way they should. But Nashville has a special place in this story because right here in Nashville, Tennessee became the deciding final state to take the passage of the 19th Amendment over the top. And it could have been who knows when. It really came down to Tennessee. There were 35 states. You needed to get 36 states to ratify it for it to become a part of the United States Constitution. It got to 35 and it stalled. And there were only a minuscule number of other states that were even thinking about it at the time. And the others chose not to to call, the governors chose not to call special sessions, et cetera, but Tennessee called it, and it came down to one vote in our state legislature. And a great story about a mother encouraging her son to change his vote and be that last vote that got Tennessee to be the state responsible for women getting the right to vote. So that is what is being celebrated in this room. And, for anyone watching this now or in the future, please go see it. It's called the Votes for Women Room. It is so inspirational. It tells history, and it's, it is interactive with all kinds of colors and LED ways that the stories can be told, and challenging stories. It brings up all of the things that many of which are still with us in terms of challenges to our democracy and to our country running right and getting to places of justice. For example, big time, the racism that took place back then, the voter suppression that took place back in 1920, also the corporate interests, the so many challenges that we're still working on as we sit here. And I one of the things I do want to mention, because one of the things I'm the proudest of that I got to work on when I was in Washington was back in the early 90s, was the Environmental Justice Executive Order. And to this day now, environment and environmental justice are just coming into their own, and much of it is being led by women. And the way this all comes around is so exciting. So that's the women's thing, and we're starting great programming, and it is going to be, I think it is already one of the most challenging, inspirational, inspiring places. And we've funded the programs for the next 10 years and collections for 10 years, and great speakers coming to Nashville, great inspiring women speakers coming to Nashville for 10 years. So, and on top of that,
Jeannie, obviously I love hearing you talk about votes for women, but, I'm struck after listening to you that, you've done a permanent space, that talks about democracy, women, and power. And it's not just an exhibit, it's there in conjunction with the Civil Rights Room for people to come and see forever, as long as the library is there. And then you've done all this permanent land and easements, conservation easements, quite a legacy. And then you just bring up this Environmental Justice Act. This executive order. There are so many pieces of your activism that are now permanent, a permanent legacy. And so I just, as a last question, want to ask you about, this is a video from the Nashville Bar Association. And I want your thoughts about where we are, in the future, and really how being a lawyer shapes you and your thoughts about the future.
I have never, well, let's start this way. I have always felt and known that my ability and opportunity to work on things that can move things forward, grounded in the fact that I am learned in the law. And so I really don't know that I could have had the confidence or the thinking ability to move any of these. But for the future, I have never been as strongly knowing that the law and what it is so critical to the future of our country. I would say the world, but man, we're in a time when we've got to really focus on this country. So it gives me confidence. When people used to talk about there were too many lawyers, but that gives me confidence that there are so many people who can use that for the good and who know that that grounds us. And when we don't appreciate and do it, we're going to have problems. So I don't know that's exactly what you may want to re-ask me a question, but I've never felt more strongly about the importance of lawyers and what they do to make our law and our laws mean something.
Hey, back on the screen.
Thank you for coming back.
Through a long conversation, but
I am
so
scared
much
to look at how long, but
that you have to share. And I just wanted to make sure that, because I mean, I fully believe in another decade, it's time for another interview with Jeannie Nelson, because I mean, you're not stopping. Your foot is on the pedal. I am so grateful that you became the activist. But you know, you said this, you still have figured out a way to maintain so many relationships, so much respect while you are still an activist. And I think that is one thing that I hope that people who listen to you and listen to how you approach your next startup. I mean, you love to start things, you know, and how you see them through and how you stick with them, how you know maybe when it's time to go, when things are healthy enough that what you started can, you know, can do what you hoped it would do. Your lasting legacies and still your energy for the things you love, politics, empowering women, the environment, your husband, the tremendous relationship and partnership that you all have had and still have, still both doing so much. So I just want to end this conversation with saying thank you so much for going to law school. Because I agree with you. I mean, I think it is just giving you the ability and the platform and the confidence to do all these amazing things. So thank you, Jeannie Nelson, for your time today.
Thank you, Margaret. And thank you for taking your time. Thank you for being a great interviewer. And most importantly, for being a great friend. I love you.
Likewise.